What's up, Swole Soldiers? Welcome to episode 30 of the Strength House podcast. Tonight, we are going to break down some awesome feats of strength by some Strength House clients themselves, including milestone lifts of 315-pound bench press, 315-pound female deadlift, and 600-pound deadlifts by more than one individual. We'll look at videos of their technique, their approach, and dissect their programming. You don't want to miss this.
The Strength House Podcast, featuring Greg Robbins and Tony Bonvecchio.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 30 of the Strength House Podcast. Got Tony alongside me tonight. We're coming at you live from Worcester, Massachusetts at the Strength House itself. Excuse me. And we got a good episode for you tonight. We recently had 6 different people compete in powerlifting meets at different levels, as well as some pretty big lifetime PRs set by Strength House athletes in the gym. A couple people who don't compete but still take their training really seriously. So tonight we're going to talk about their training, look at some videos of those lifts, and just break it down a little bit for you guys.
Yeah, I'm excited to get kind of nerdy on the whole programming front and talk about kind of what some of these successful programs have had that are similar, because I think that's something that's, we're big on in the Strength House, is that, even though people are lifting from all over the country, all over the world, we're part of a team, and people are more similar than they are different. So I'm excited to kind of put it all together so our listeners can hear what it is we're doing and what these lifters have in common, more so than what they have, on an individual basis.
Absolutely. But first and most importantly, we have a special beer night, actually.
Yep. We ventured out to gather supplies for this weekend's grand opening, and just so happened that Treehouse still had a couple leftover bottles of their very special stout double shot. So this is a stout that goes that rotates with different kinds of coffee. So this one is the Kenya variation.
Kenya Karimikui.
Karimikui? Oh, I guess it was easier than I thought.
Yeah, maybe not.
That's why I didn't even go for it. But anyways, every double shot variation I've had has been excellent. So we're doing a one beer podcast tonight because we've been at the gym all day and it's late.
Yep.
And we want to get to the point, enjoy our beer, talk about programming, and then go home and go to bed.
Absolutely.
So here we go. So I'm drinking out of a plastic cup because I can't find my Strength House podcast glass. So much for proper glassware.
Well, we might have a Strength House thief.
Yeah.
Someone has taken Tony's proper glassware.
Or it could very well just be at my house in my dishwasher.
Also a possibility.
All right. We've had a lot of stouts on here recently, huh?
We have. As the weather gets a little cooler here in New England, you might see us shift our beer style and enjoy a few more stouts.
Oh, man, there's so much coffee smell in this.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of coffee today. Might as well have some more.
I'm looking forward to tasting the nougat in here.
The nougat?
What
is it, a Snickers bar?
On the back it says, you will have aromas of baker's chocolate, molasses, nougat, honey, and full-bodied coffee. So I'm a big nougat fan, and look forward to the nougat taste that might be in this beer.
I get the nougat.
The nougat shines through.
Yep. It tastes like somebody put like a bunch of like nice dark roast coffee into a blender with like a handful of those like mini Snickers bars that you get at Halloween.
A handful of nougats.
Wow, that's good.
That is very good.
Very good. And you know what? I'm so excited that they had this today because I have one bottle in my fridge at home. I was thinking that was the only bottle I was going to get. I was going to share it with my wife, and now I get twice as much double shot.
That is true. And I've actually, spoiler alert, already had half a bottle of this, as we got it the other week, and I split it. But it would be nice to sip on it again and see what comes through.
Yeah, this is good. All right, let's talk some lifting. So let's talk about the gym PRs that went down recently. Two of the guys that you programmed for hit the same humongous milestone this past week. We had two lifters who hit their first ever 600-pound deadlift. Really, really impressive, both those guys. So can you talk a little bit about the two guys who hit the 600-pound deadlift and the programming that you used to get them there? What was similar, what was different, and kind of how you approached it for each of them?
Yeah, definitely. I think a 600-pound deadlift is nothing to scoff at. Both these guys are, one is definitely sub 200 and the other one is probably right around 200 even. So we're talking about a 3 times body weight pull. And I'm not a huge believer, excuse me for a second, my phone is acting up. I think that there is something to be said for evaluating lifts based on a certain per times body weight. But at the same time, I think that strong is strong, and if you're light enough, getting yourself to a 3 times body weight, in my opinion, is I don't want to say less impressive, but I've seen it happen way more often than people so people I feel like can get to a 400 or 500 pound deadlift, subsequently, depending on their weight, have that be 3 times body weight. And it happens fairly regularly, where I feel like when you start to get into the 600 to 700 pound range, whether it's exactly 3 times body weight or not, those numbers are just harder to come by. They take a certain amount of discipline in and out of the gym, in my experience, for people to hit a 600 pound deadlift almost regardless of their weight, or anything above that. So
that's why we have the Wilks score. It's not perfect, but
right,
it definitely takes away some of that. Like, you know, a 100-pound person deadlifting 300 is impressive, but a 200-pound person deadlifting 6 is more impressive, and a 300-pound person deadlifting 900 is just insane.
Exactly.
You know, and Wilks score kind of rewards that a little bit.
Right, and that's not perfect either, probably, but it definitely was an improvement on looking at it. So I think 600 is a pretty big milestone, regardless of your weight. You know, if you're in that mid 200s and below range and you're hitting a 600 pound deadlift, that's definitely a sign of someone who has well above average strength levels. And with that, and I use that as a preface only because I think for both the guys we're going to talk about, there was definitely a change in gear. So both of these individuals, both Eric and Tony, are both guys that I've programmed for fairly regularly for a long time. And both of them were always able to hit like mid 500 pound deadlifts. And while the programming is definitely part of the equation, it doesn't even begin to take the credit for what they achieved. I think the credit goes to really a change of heart in how they approach their training, with more intensity, with more consistency, and handling themselves better outside the gym as well from a recovery standpoint.
And the deadlift especially, you can set all the numbers and you can, plan out the training well ahead of time. But if you're timid approaching a 600-pound deadlift, your chances for success are almost zero. So I feel like I've watched both these guys have a change in just the way that they approach the bar from a mental standpoint. You can kind of see it in their physicality as we look at the videos of their setups and how aggressive they get approaching the bar, that I think had a big impact on their ability to hit this milestone too.
Yeah, and I think we both agree, and we coach the deadlift with a lot of intensity. It's a hugely mental lift, one that takes a certain amount of intensity. I like to think of the word violence. I use that a lot with people when they're getting ready to deadlift, but I like deadlifting to kind of be an act of violence. You have to really have the will to pull and to try to blast that thing off the floor the best that you can. So why don't we look at these lifts first, just so you guys can see them. So why don't we start with Eric, because he pulled it first. Not only a great deadlift, but an epic celebration that you'll see here.
This was fun to watch.
Just the sign of someone that's wanted something for a long time, train their ass off. And like I said, when you see someone celebrate like this, a lift, it's a sign that more went into this than just showing up at the gym. There was a certain amount of sacrifice that had to go on in daily life to prioritize, recovery and nutrition and things like that all pays off.
And I want to preface this by saying that this occurred sometime like mid-afternoon a couple Fridays ago, and you were glued to your phone waiting, for him to update you on what he did. So it's pretty funny and inspiring to watch you and see how invested you were in this big moment. Like, it's sometimes we get more nervous than our lifters do when something big is coming up.
Yeah. I had all the confidence in the world in both these guys to pull this weight, and we'll talk about the programming in a second and some of the numbers that I try to think of, that if someone can hit certain numbers, then they're probably set up to pull 600. But yeah, I mean, just super anxious to. You obviously, we want it to go well because they put a lot of time and effort into it, and when it all comes down in a sport like powerlifting, whether it's in a meet or in a gym like these two settings, a lot went into it, and it can be a mental travesty if it doesn't happen for you. Even if it's close and that lift's probably right there and you could probably get it 4 weeks later, but it still can take a big mental toll on you. So let's watch Eric go for his 600 here.
Great shirt too.
Beautiful blue Strength House shirt. Internet not cooperating with us though. Here we go.
That is a nice pull, man.
It's a great pull, even better celebration, which is awesome. If you guys can't quite see it at home, it's on our Strength House Instagram page. You scroll down, and that was posted on October 6th.
And if I'm speaking to people in the future, because I can time travel, if you're listening to this on iTunes, it's going to be worth checking out this episode on YouTube as well, so you can get a little bit better view of what's going on and what we're talking about.
Yep. So, Eric stuck with it through the whole thing. It was a pretty smooth lift. I wouldn't say that there were any points where he was really stuck, although...
Really good speed off the floor, and he transitioned over his knee beautifully. Like, that bar never really slowed down at all.
Yep.
Consistent speed throughout.
And I think what he did really well, and it's something that we coach a lot with our lifters, is right about the time that it gets here at the knee, this lift can go two ways. You will see a lot of people at this point, just based on how heavy it is, start to panic a little bit and dip the knees, and either hitch or try to ratchet the bar up a little bit, or they'll just not commit to what Eric does next. And what Eric does next is he locks his knees out quite aggressively, and at that point he can easily finish the lift through with his hips. If he did not have that intent there, he might have got to the point where he's just a few inches away from lockout and pretty much out of gas and not able to complete the lift. So really good lift there by Eric. And then for a completely different perspective with Tony, who pulls a sumo with even a bit of a narrower stance.
Yeah, right there.
We'll check this one out.
And Tony's lifetime PR before this was in what, like the 570s?
It was 570, so...
Yep, so that's a big PR for somebody who's been lifting for a long time.
Yep, and I think Eric's was right around the same.
Also a very smooth lift. Once it got going, man, never slowed down.
Yep. I think what I like best about Tony's lift here is for a sumo puller, and this is actually a really good angle to see it at, is how well he wedges himself and gets his weight behind the bar. So as he approaches the bar here, I would say right here he kind of rocks back to his heels, and you can really see that everything is back behind that bar. So if he was to let go, at this point the lift hasn't even begun yet, if he was to let go of this bar with his hands at this point, he would fall over backwards quite quickly. And that gives him the chance that when he starts pulling and the weight yanks him just a tad forward, he's able to recover and get right back behind the bar. And once you see a guy or girl get into this position on the sumo, where the armpits are right over the bar and the shins are vertical, like, you're only going to miss this lift at this point because it's too heavy. He's in a great position to fight against this weight if needed for a long time, which he didn't need because he's got a nice smooth pull right through to the finish. And Tony was chasing that for a long time. Ups and downs, lots of life things happening, but with a shift in his lifestyle, as well as really being set on it, having I think turned 40 years old and really wanted to pull 600 and get the lift that he always said that he wanted to get. This was pretty awesome to see.
Let's go back to the beginning for a second. Right before he pulls, something I think is really important to notice is how high his hips stay. A lot of times I see sumo deadlifters try to dip their hips so low and try to kind of squat the weight up, but he does a great job of what you said before, wedging. And appropriate wedging means you don't drop your hips down. It means you push your hips towards the bar instead of driving them, or down rather. So like his hips never get lower than kind of that. He doesn't have deep hip flexion there at all. He doesn't try to sit down. He's trying to put his hips in a certain spot and then push them forward as he's driving his shoulders back to create that good wedge. And that bar never drifts in front of him. It does pull him forward a little bit, but that's heavy weight, so it's going to happen. But because he keeps that bar so close to his hips the whole time, he has a really good bar path and just very, very smooth once it gets going.
Yeah, and I mean, of note too, this is definitely a much narrower sumo, especially for Tony's height. So it's going to look a little more like a conventional pull. But you are right. Most people do dip the hips too low. This is reminiscent of, as great as this lift is and a lifetime accomplishment for Tony, it is reminiscent of Ed Cohen's very famous kind of modified sumo pull as far as the form. And I know that a long time ago, when Tony kind of switched this modified sumo, that was someone that we, kind of modeled it off of and he had talked about.
So Tony G, if you're listening, Greg just compared you to Ed Cohen, so congratulations. So you got two 600-pound deadlifters. Yeah. One guy pulls conventional. One guy pulls sumo. Two kind of different approaches to the bar. Eric is kind of like an aggressive, fast, like grip and rip. Tony kind of wedges himself into position as more of a tension guy. How did the programming differ, or maybe even better, what stayed the same despite the technique differences to help get these guys where they went?
I think there's more the same than there was different. I think the nature of being either a conventional or a sumo puller, conventional lends itself better to being really aggressive off of the floor, whereas sumo, I think, being too aggressive off the floor is not the right way to go. It's more about tensioning the bar up, and then because you're locked into such a great position like this one, leverage-wise, once it breaks the floor, you can really use the legs to accelerate to your finish. And for the most part, I feel like that really aggressive yank on the bar sumo style has kind of phased itself out. I don't see as many lifters doing it anymore, which I'm glad, because that means that I won't have to coach any lifters that are trying to model themselves off of that technique, because I really do not agree at all with the grip and rip sumo. I think sumo is a lot more of a wedging into position and really tensioning the bar off the ground and then exploding through your finish as much as you can. Sumo is just a technical leverage game, and it's all about tension and strength, whereas conventional is, I think, just a lot more about balls, if you will, or spine, so that it's equally not gender specific, but having the spine to really go after the bar and rip it off the ground and stay tight through the lift.
So did you change anything as far as accessory work between these two guys? Did Eric pull any sumo stuff? Did Tony pull any conventional stuff? Vice versa?
No, but we can dissect their programming a little bit. Let's look at Connor's first and look at all three programs, because all these
Another
guys,
big deadlift, yeah.
All these guys were going for similar goals. So from a deadlift standpoint, there's a lot of similarities between these programs. I think the biggest difference you'll see when we look at Connor's is that he was competing in a full power meet, and that we had to prioritize all three lifts. Mm-hmm. Whereas one thing I will show you with Eric and Tony is how to, if someone has the goal of pulling 600, for example, in the squat, can take a little bit of a back seat. by doing that, you can really set them up for a big pull.
And that's something that kind of happened with your training leading up to your last meet. You did a push-pull. You had that 700-pound deadlift. You felt like you weren't even training lower body, on your squat day. You were still getting your work in, but it was very much reduced.
Yeah, there was a point where I reached out to Josh and said, like, can we train the lower body a little more aggressively because I'm feeling kind of like weak trying to drive the bar off the ground. So we actually almost had to uptake it a little bit. And part of that was we had been training squats kind of modestly because I had some back stuff going on that was getting more exacerbated from squatting than it was from deadlifting. So it kind of fed into that. But I did realize that I needed to just kind of suck it up a little bit because if I wasn't training my squat quite heavy enough, I just wasn't feeling as good with my deadlift either. So next one is Connor. I mean, Connor's been crushing it. So this is basically the culmination of our second training block of 12 weeks. And I'd have to go back and look, but I want to say when Connor started, his best deadlift was maybe like 475. So in about 24, 26 weeks, we put about 100 pounds on his deadlift, which is pretty awesome. And he had more in the tank on this, but this is 573 for Connor, which was even from his first meet. So both times we've done 12-week training blocks, they've been culminating in a meet. Which I love because Connor is actually an ex-minor league baseball player, played a lot of professional baseball, and wanted an outlet to keep competing and take his training more seriously. He's a strength coach as well now. So we've done 2 meets in a relatively short amount of time, and he's a gamer, which you would expect from somebody that has already played, organized sports at such a high level. He really does show up on meet day, but I think another thing you'll see in his program is that we took his training heavier right into the meet just because he is a little bit more of a beginner, and I don't feel like beginners do as well with training super sub-maximally and then going into a meet and not having felt any kind of weight beforehand.
573 deadlift as a beginner, not a bad thing.
Right.
he's got a good lifting career in front of him, man.
Yeah, and I think it has a lot to do with his intensity. He trains hard, and he doesn't leave anything in the tank when it comes to going for these lifts. He doesn't shy down from them at all. So this is 573.
Yeah, he would just come with PR after PR in training and just rode it right into the meet.
And nice smooth pull. All 3 of those lifts as a coach is exactly what you want to see when someone sets a big PR for themselves. There's no real grinding going on in either of these. I mean, they're not lightning fast, but you're not going to expect that necessarily.
But again, smooth and steady, like no dramatic sticking point, no point where he really has to grind it. At no point during this lift do you think he's not going to get it.
Nope, he crushed it. Another good job of you can tell with good deadlifters that they're driving through the floor and they're pushing the deadlift. They're not pulling the deadlift. They've pulled themselves into a good position to get their back in the right spot, and you can really see that legs are active just by the fact that those knees start extending at a very even pace throughout the whole lift, and they go right to lockout, and then the lift finishes. So an awesome lift from Connor as well. Super proud of everything that he's put together so far. I mean, from where we've started, I guess, about half a year, maybe just a touch over half a year now. I'd have to go look at it, but I know he's put over 200 pounds on his total, if not close to 300 pounds on his total. Hit his first 300-pound bench press in a meet too in this competition, and also shattered his squat PR as well. So so you want to look at some of the similarities between them?
Yeah, let's talk about the programming aspect, what kind of went into building these big lifts.
So we'll focus on the deadlift, and a lot of this has really been influenced by what Josh Bryant has helped me with my own deadlift, and it's super intensity driven. So with Eric, you'll see that in block 1, so this program in total was a 12-week program. It was in week 13 basically, after unloading a little bit, that he pulled 600.
Gotta get some more storage on that phone of yours.
My phone sucks.
One day we'll upgrade technology on this show.
So basically, I'd look back because we're working off reach maxes here, and reach maxes are kind of just my benchmark for what I think someone will be capable of hitting.
Well, this begs the question. Eric's training max looks like it's set at 575 for that deadlift. Is that what you kind of worked off of the whole time?
Yeah, 575 is well, you'll see that basically we started with some percentages, and this is what I'll do with a lot of people is we'll start with some percentages off of I think what happened was Eric told me that his best lift at the time was maybe like a pretty easy 545 or something like that off of like an inch or two mat. And we had worked a lot beforehand on some stuff, so I just kind of projected that, you know, the training we would do, we would work off of 575 max. You know, we both thought that he'd probably give that a run. It was a little bit aggressive, but we'd give it a run. And that we wouldn't be prioritizing the squat quite as much, but we could train the bench aggressively and try to work on that, because I don't think training the bench aggressively would take away from the deadlift. But we both knew that, you know, the end goal here was to chase after that 600-pound deadlift. So because he hadn't been training the deadlift as heavy going into our cycle together, I had him start off of a 2-inch block. That way we could actually give him a slight advantage in his case, because he's aggressive, but he's not like a yanker on the bar. And he starts with a pretty vertical shin. So I didn't think that the 2-inch block, I know for like guys like you and me, it makes it a little more difficult. For him, I think it gives him a slight advantage.
Yeah, 2-inch block for me is brutal.
Yeah.
I'm looking at that, a triple at 92%. I'm not so sure I could do that off a 2-inch block.
Yeah. So like I said, intensity was the name of the game. We started right off the bat in week 1 with a triple at 92%, which was 535 for him. And he rated at 10 RPE. It was pretty hard.
Coming right out the gate.
Yep. So we actually went back to that sorry, that's not right. We just started adding intensity to that. I basically chalked it up to the fact that he hadn't really pulled heavy in a while. And I'd have to go back in emails, but you know, one of the ways that we do online coaching is a week-to-week basis, so people give us feedback. And I imagine that his feedback might have been something along the lines of, in this case, of, you know, not being completely recovered or in a great place for that lift. So we used, you know, in any kind of peaking block, you're going to use a pretty linear progression. So in week 1, we started with 24 reps of sub-maximal work. So at about 73%, we did 24 reps, and we did a triple at 92% off a block. In week 3, we did 30 total reps at 73% and pushed up to 545 for the triple off of blocks. And in week, you know what? So that's what we did. Sorry. Some of this happened a long time ago, so it's just jogging my memory. But we actually repeated week 1 and 2. So with the RPEs being so high in week 1, he did the exact same thing, it looks like, in week 2. Either that or we screwed up the sheet somehow and a week went missing. But
well, the RPEs were listed differently, so it looks like you just did the same thing and his RPEs went down.
Okay.
You didn't fill in it. But
I think more appropriately what happened here was he probably went 535 for a triple in week 1, 540 for a triple in week 2, and 545 for a triple in week 3. So it was basically just like a bunch of work right around 90%, with, you know, the trivial difference between pulling 535 and pulling 545. So it was just about getting a lot of quality work there. We deloaded in week 4 and we came back, and now we're pulling from the floor. So the idea of giving him the blocks was to start just loading him up again and like neurally getting him charged up. So in week 5, we pulled 525 from the floor for a double, and for our sub-maximal deadlift work, we pulled 400 with 100 pounds of chain for 5 singles. So this was something I started using a little bit more. Like if somebody wants to pull a single rep for a certain weight, just again, I really feel like with the deadlift, if they're close to that goal already, and we're talking about trying to raise the lift by, let's say, like 50, 60 pounds, it's a lot about just handling heavier weight and getting some intensity in there. I think intensity works really well for the deadlift. Maybe not so much for some people on like the squat. I feel like I've seen much better results with a lot of submaximal work on the squat. And I guess the bench I've probably seen go both ways. You're more of the bench master, and I have some questions for you on building a bench press for later. So just to not take up too much time, but 525 for a double in week 5. In week 6, we hit 540 for a double, so a pretty big jump because it was just an 8 at 525 for a double, and I'm probably looking for things to be at about a 9 on that top set. So we went 545 for a double, and we added 10 pounds to the deadlift singles that were happening with 100 pounds of chain.
And lots of heavy rows, lots of heavy posterior chain stuff on these days as well. Is that something you consciously do for somebody who's a little bit more like vertical shin, kind of like posterior chain dominant? Somebody like you and me, maybe we use a little bit more of a shin angle and like use the quads to pop off the floor. But for somebody like Eric who has a more vertical shin, do you focus more on those muscle groups that are going to get the bar going?
Yeah, but I think like a really just powerful back is just really important to those lifts anyway. So we're going to crush just a lot of, I guess, just like more aggressive loading patterns that are similar to the deadlift. So safety squat bar good mornings, pen lay rows are all putting you in this deadlift position. So this 4th day of deadlifting day is like just training that position over and over and over again and asking for stability in it.
I wouldn't be able to sit on the toilet after that day.
So he finished off his second block. I saw that he pulled 540 for the double, and he rated it an 8.5. And as a coach, I kind of just looked at it and I was like, okay, I want to start alternating singles and doubles because training's hitting like a nice groove here, and I think like linearly we can really start to progress. I want to see more and more intensity because in my head, something around 570 for a single, if I can get them to pull that with bar speed that looks pretty solid, and something around 550, 555 for a double that looks pretty solid. Those are the two numbers that I was looking at. Like, okay, if we can hit those and they're looking pretty smooth, and then we taper correctly, or we consolidate our training means correctly and really have this person fresh and ready to go, they can give 600 a run.
It's insane when you start to get up into these higher deadlift numbers, how big of jumps you can see, because obviously the bigger the number on the bar, the lower percentage a big jump is, if that makes sense. Going from 555 to 600 is not that big a jump percentage wise. It sounds like a lot, 45 pounds, but it's just amazing that you're able to see these lifters make these big leaps. And even though this is intense training, it still sounds submaximal. It's not like Eric had to go up to 590 in training to be able to hit 600 when he tested.
No, yeah, that's like almost getting too close. And again, this is all based off of, like, there's obviously an art and a science to coaching, I think. And what I really like about the weekly updates is it allows us as a coach to go with the art, like more of the communication and kind of just being like, all right, I'm just looking for trends in training and how things are going, and I can, it's not a perfect periodization necessarily. I have a thought plan, but a lot of it comes up to just making calls and saying, this is how things are going, I'm gonna make this call, let's go for this.
Yep. And like 560 for a single at 8.5, like that to me sounds like smooth.
Yeah, that was super smooth. And you kind of throw that single in there towards the end almost as like a feeler too, because we're doing most of our work with these these 5 singles at 5:15 essentially that he's doing afterwards, that's where we're accumulating some volume and seeing if he can handle that. And so when you get a week back and he says, okay, I pulled 560 for a single at 8.5, I pulled 5 singles at 4:15 with 100 pounds of chains and rated a 7. That's starting to show you that like things are going really well. And as a coach, to me, the next call was we had an unloading week coming up, and when I saw those numbers right there, it's like, all right, 600 is in him probably. He's probably pretty close to it already. So now it's about like preparing him like neurally and mentally to hit 600.
Okay, so where did you go after the unloading week?
After the unloading week, we started alternating the doubles and singles a little bit. So we actually dropped it down and we hit 550 for a double, which was less than the single, obviously, but that was a number that I had in my head. I wanted to hit 550 for a double. If he can hit 550 for a double, I'm starting to feel more confident about his ability to hit 600. And we went and started to taper everything else quite aggressively. So his sub-maximal work was just 4 singles at 400.
And what were the RPEs on those? I can't get your thing to move.
So
probably pretty low, I imagine.
He rated 8.5 on the double, and in true Eric fashion, decided not to fill in the rest of his sheet.
So it must have been easy.
It was, yeah. But by design, it was supposed to be easy. And for a guy that can squat just over 500 pounds, you'll see in his squat day up here that we weren't doing really that much. 440 for a single was all that he did. So a little bit of intensity, but he rated his single on the squat that day as a 7, and that's kind of what I wanted at that point. To me, we were done training the squat. Like, we were purely giving some stimulus to his lower body on those days, so we didn't want to go too light, but we wouldn't want to take away. I wanted this final day of the week for him to feel really good for that day. So he hit 550 for the double. In week 10, it was time to go and hit the single, and this was kind of the very telling single. He hit 575 for a single. He rated it a 9. The other thing we do as part of our group is videos. So I got to see the 575, and it moved really well.
All the videos he posted throughout this training cycle, I remember thinking, like, he's coming. Like, here it is. And
then we backed down, hit 455 for 4 singles. And the rest of after that, all we did was chest supported rows for 3 sets of 5. So, like, this day was basically warming up with box jumps, warming up with some speed squats, and really just hitting 5 singles on the deadlift. So at this point, it's purely peaking. It's just hitting these weights and ramping up towards the 600. In week 11, we hit 560 for a double, which was almost just like insurance at this point, I feel like. And if that's not, a huge confidence booster to him as well, like, we're gonna hit 560 for a double. It was tough. I still think it was smooth. He rated it a 10. And then some easy singles at 470 afterwards, which, after you've hit a double at 560, those singles at 470, though, are definitely simulating much heavier weight, even though there's not much weight on the bar. The squat, again, just 450 for a single, again at a 7. I wanted everything up here to be a 7 or a low 8, if anything. We deloaded in week 12, so that was pretty light across the board. 6 singles at 390 on the deadlift with no other deadlift. And then week 13, we just hit a bunch of pretty easy stuff as far as the squat day goes, and we got the 600-pound pull, which, like, with Eric, I was pretty damn confident that he was gonna hit that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool to see the way it all unfolded, and I can vouch for seeing the videos and seeing all his deadlifts leading up to that, and everything just looked like super smooth and crisp. No setbacks for him for sure. So that sounds like everything went according to plan.
Yeah, it was a really good training cycle, and I think that the other 2 guys were in a very similar spot. We were alternating a lot of, like, we were started with a lot of triples in the first 4-week block of training, and after that we were just alternating a lot of doubles and singles, and the picking the weights on those was just trying to keep them around like a 9 and just linearly progressing them to where they were hitting almost like frog leaping, kind of like, okay, I hit this number for a single in this week, and then the next week I'm going to go lower and I'm going to hit a double there, and then the next week I'm going to hit a single that's a little bit higher, and then we're going to deload, and then at the start of the next cycle I'm going to take one of those singles you hit, make that a double, and then go for a single that's a little bit higher, and then go for a double which is pretty close to that second single that you pulled. So I think like leapfrogging it has been a really good approach, using doubles and singles after some acclimation period of triples to really help people just like neurally build that strength, and it's worked. It worked really well in all 3 cases.
And it keeps it intense, but you can't always necessarily like keep progressing the singles every week. So it sounds like a good way to work around that.
Yeah, and if we look at just the nature of a deadlift, like a bunch of submaximal volume on a deadlift just doesn't make as much sense to me, where it's more like it's such a mindset, it's such a skill, and it's such just like an ability to just display some raw strength. So like for sure we're building strength, we're not just testing it, but there is an element of like testing what you can take and how fast you can move something that's pretty heavy. So the mindset shifted from like, let's just do a bunch of work, to let's take some pretty challenging stuff and really just focus on being really aggressive with singles and doubles, both in the straight weight sets and then the back down sets, which might include chains, might include reverse bands or something like that, where it's almost just like a ton of practice and a very linear progression to building up the deadlift.
Yep.
Cool. All right, so I'm going to shift this over to you because I got some questions for you.
Yep, I had a couple lifters compete as well. Going to talk a little bit about what we did with them, and it's actually quite different than what you did with yours. Different lifters, different experience levels, so naturally the programming would be a little bit different. But these 2 lifters use similar programming with small tweaks here and there to kind of fit them individually. So first I'll talk about our boy Joey, who went to Raw Nationals 2 weeks ago now, 2 weekends ago now. Joey competes in the 74 kilo class. He weighed in at about 160 and put up some really awesome numbers. Hit PRs across the board. We want to talk about his deadlift specifically to keep on task.
My question has more to do with his bench press, but
all right. Well, I want to see this deadlift just because. So Joey pulled a deadlift PR of 462 at a body weight of 160. So he's a sumo guy, and he's a gamer. You know, we talked about Connor being a gamer. Joey is absolutely a gamer. He's a guy who thrives off of that competitive environment. Definitely gets some extra gas in the tank when all eyes are on him. Can't necessarily like bring up that intensity in training. So we actually did a ton of sub-maximal stuff for him and very, very little heavy stuff. Heavy meaning like over 90% in training, because we knew that he thrives off that environment. So you want to talk about his bench specifically?
Well, I think his bench is quite impressive. For a body weight of 160, he makes basically a 315-pound bench press look really smooth. And he's just not a big guy. So like, I talk about this lift with some of our clients in the gym, and I tell them that he weighs 160, and I think they expect to see somebody that's really short and just built like a brick shithouse, just really compact. And that's not really Joey.
Yeah, Joey, he's a good bencher, and we did a lot of work. So he had good bench numbers when we started working together. He was in like the high 200s, and I think he'd missed several times. He'd missed around like 305, 310 on the bench in meets. And for him, I feel like a lot of it was just getting the technique dialed in. So Joey had like most of the foundation of a good bench, but had a real big issue of flaring his elbows too early off the chest. So kind of a lanky lifter, a little bit longer arms. You can see he gets his grip out real wide to kind of work around that, to reduce the range of motion a little bit. And we had to work really, really hard on getting his bar path correct. So pretty good brute strength on the bench, but just was getting stuck a lot because the elbows would flare super early and he'd miss in that kind of like bottom third of the bench. So that worked well with doing a lot of submaximal volume and a lot of accessory work to specifically target that weak point. And you can see there that he does a much better job of keeping the elbows tucked initially and then flaring out, and that timing is so crucial. If you're a shorter arm lifter like myself and you start out wide, you can flare almost instantaneously. But a guy like Joey has got to stay tucked a little bit longer. So we did a ton of Spoto pressing, a ton of concentric pause bench pressing, and an absolute metric shit ton of triples between 70 and 80%. We did so much of that. We did a lot of back down sets, a lot of AMRAP sets, and I think, for somebody who came out and benched 315, I don't think we touched anything over 295 in training, except for in the last couple weeks. And actually, we made a little bit of a change as the meet approached, and I was very much tied to that sub-maximal, like let's do a lot of work, 70 to 80%, every once in a while, single or a double at kind of 85%. But Joey came in to the gym about 4 weeks out, and we kind of did some indicator singles, and they didn't go as well as we had hoped. He ended up, I think, missing like a 320 bench, and we talked about it, and it's like, okay, we need to incorporate some heavier stuff so you can keep your technique there. And that's something that on all of Joey's lifts, his technical max had to get higher. When we first started working together, his technique would kind of break down in that 80 to 85% range, so we weren't getting a lot of quality work in there. So we actually had to start pushing the singles a little bit heavier so he could show himself that he could keep his shit together at heavier weights. So closer to the meet, we did start incorporating kind of like a heavy single and then chopping off some of that sub-maximal volume to kind of account for it. But all in all, we did tons of work and mostly triples, 70 to 80%, sneak in a single once in a while, and about 3 weeks out started incorporating just singles at 90, then a single at 92.5, and then by the time he got to the meet, he was pretty well equipped to hit those PRs. So a little bit different approach, not very linear at all, more volume based, but it's funny how it all kind of circles back around, and what really kind of tied it all together was incorporating some heavy stuff at the end.
Yeah. Nice. The other one, another big one is, so we've talked about 4 male lifters. So we had a plethora of female lifters recently, and Lana hit her milestone. A big milestone for any female lifter is 3 plates on the deadlift.
Yeah, Lana did this past weekend. We had a good crew of lifters here in Brockton, Massachusetts, and this has quickly become one of my favorite lifts of all time. Of any of our lifters. So Lana's been chasing a 315 deadlift for a long time, and she finally put it together, and this is she crushed this, like super smooth. This looks a lot like Connor's lift, I feel like, where like it's just smooth the whole way up. She was so excited, and I'm just so happy for Lana that she put that together. So Lana followed a similar programming skeleton, if you will, to what Joey did, but I would say that we didn't end up hitting any of the heavy singles towards the end. She actually just rode out that submaximal volume all the way through. And that's a testament to her patience, to her, trusting the process. And I think that Lana really kind of found her technique earlier on. And sometimes that happens with some lifters. Like some lifters get like too strong too quick, if you will, and they develop some bad habits and don't want to kind of like step back and evaluate what's going on because it's like, well, shit, I'm pretty strong already. But Lana she made a big change after her last meet. She switched from sumo deadlifting to conventional deadlifting, and that actually worked really well. And you know what? We pushed her squat super hard this whole training cycle. Her deadlift was not an afterthought, but almost the way that Eric's squat was kind of secondary to his deadlift. Lana, we did the inverse. So we trained her squat like crazy, trained it 2 days a week with tons and tons and tons of volume. And the deadlifting was a little bit more like easy, if you will. She did a little bit of heavy pulling from blocks, but she never did anything heavy off the floor up until the meet. I don't think she ever touched anything over 265 or 275 from the floor, and never for more than double. But we did a lot of squatting, a lot of triples and doubles, again in that 70 to 85% range. So it all just kind of came together for her. And she's a little bit more of kind of like a lean forward, like hip dominant squatter. So it seemed to carry over nicely to her deadlift. So I don't know if we have a video of Lana's squat in here, probably not, but I feel like they almost complemented each other well. So I didn't feel compelled to train the deadlift all that heavy because she was squatting pretty heavy and taxing a lot of those same muscle groups.
Awesome. So what would you say were some of the biggest similarities between those two very successful meets that went on?
I would say building up that base of volume early on, setting that foundation, the whole concept of if you build a wide pyramid, then that peak can be much higher. So Joey reached out to me a long ways out from nationals. I think we got about maybe 24 weeks together. So, and he knew he wanted to do nationals. As soon as Joey qualified for nationals, he reached out. We started working together. We had that opportunity to build that base. Yeah. And I think if you have that amount of time, then the sub-maximal approach works because you have the time to build up all those qualities that you want. And we've known Lana for a long time. Lana, interned with us at CSP. When she was an intern, I started, doing some of her programming and had just had a long time of working with her. So with those people who I know I'm going to have for a very long time, I really like to take that opportunity and build that volume up very gradually. That way, I never feel like I'm in a hurry. Certainly, if you have only a little bit of time to get ready for a meet, intensity has to be the thing, right? You gotta train heavy and you gotta get used to those heavy weights. But if you slow play it, and you do 1 or 2 meets a year, especially if you do a qualifier meet and a national meet like what Joey did, you have a lot of time to prepare. So I would say we kind of slow played both of them and allowed us to build up all that volume so that when it was time to compete, we had that super wide base so that we could just hit those heavy numbers and hit those PRs without having to push the intensity in training.
With the sub-maximal work that you guys did, is there any indicators, is there any certain kind of numbers or amounts of work that those guys and girls you were looking for them to be able to hit, that you knew that those third attempts would be, in this case, both around 315?
I would say that once the triples at 80% started becoming really, really easy, that's what I use as the indicator, because that was the main chunk that we used a lot of times. We would kind of build up volume at that 80 to 82.5% in triples. So by the time you're doing 5, 6, 7 triples at that range, it can either start to get really hard because you built up that fatigue, or it can start to get really easy. Then that your training max has gone up quite a bit. And pretty much every third week, we'd push something heavy in the 85-ish range, usually for a double. And that's as heavy as it would go. So that was kind of my indicator. And for both of them, over time, every time we hit that, got a little bit faster, a little bit faster, a little bit faster. The RPEs would go down a little bit. So that's where getting the feedback from them helped a lot, because that's not super heavy, 85%. But when it goes from an 8 to a 7 to a 6, and Lana was a legendary underreporter of RPEs. Her second attempt, she called it an 8. Yeah. On her squat, which then we went really aggressive on her third, and that was the only lift she missed. But that was important for me, and not necessarily having to push the numbers higher, but keeping the same number and seeing the RPE go down was a good indicator for me.
Cool. Awesome. Cool, guys. Well, I mean, I think tonight was pretty cool to talk about some of the actual clients that we work with, to take a little bit of an insight into the programming that we do. And that segues nicely into something that you guys can look out for that we're going to be doing pretty soon. If you're more local to Worcester, Massachusetts, if there's one thing that we're really trying to just take in as many as possible of it, it's people that want to do their first or maybe even just their second powerlifting meet. So keep on the lookouts for a little promotion that we'll be doing where we will be helping you train for your first powerlifting meet, and getting ready for, what is it, the Strength Bounty?
Worcester County Strength Bounty.
The Worcester County Strength Bounty, which is January 21st in Holden, Massachusetts. It's a beginner meet, so you have to have competed in 3 or fewer meets to even be able to compete in it. And we saw that, and it was, our eyes lit up because it was like, all right, this is what we're looking for. We're looking for people to fall in love with this sport and get into powerlifting training. So we'll be running a little deal where you can kind of get your foot in the door with us here, and compete in that meet where we'll be taking a pretty big team of newer lifters too.
Yep, we're gonna have a great turnout there. We've already had a couple people sign up. So this is what it's all about: getting people into the sport and having them fall in love with it the same way that we did. So keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, and many congratulations to the folks that we talked about tonight that put in all the hard work. We just pick some numbers and put them down on paper and try to intelligently as possible plan the training, but they're the ones that put in all the hard work and do everything outside of the training sessions to optimize their ability to lift those weights. And it's always a ton of fun and a real pleasure to help them out with their training. The people that we talked about tonight and everyone else that we're able to help out. Any other housekeeping notes? Well, yeah, there's a big one. We have a grand
opening. I was like, wait a second, what? This Saturday.
We have a grand opening party this Saturday at 1 o'clock at the Strength House here in Worcester, Massachusetts. We'll have food, we'll have drink, we'll have a great place for you to get a training session in. We'll be doing it from 1 o'clock till 5 o'clock. And if you are close enough that you think you can make the trip, we would love to have you. You can go to our Facebook page, and we do ask that you RSVP just so we can make sure we got enough meat and other things on hand for you to consume. You can bring a friend, bring a side dish, bring your lifting gear, and it should be an awesome event.
I'm looking forward to it. We're going to put all our favorite things together at one time and just it's going to be a blast.
Absolutely. So, anything else?
If you like tonight's episode, something that we hope to do more in the future, leave us a rating and a review on iTunes. Subscribe to us on YouTube. This will be a YouTube-heavy episode where you get to see kind of the lifts that we display here. So if you're listening to this, make sure you head over to YouTube as well. The more that you help spread the word, the more people we can reach, and the more we can keep doing the show.
Yep. Thank you guys very much for tuning in. We will be back soon with another episode of the Strength House podcast. Until then, keep training hard, and we will see you soon.
Good night.